Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's discussion. We've seen some exciting announcements between HYCU, Dell, and the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. The focus of today's discussion here is on Microsoft 365, not only data protection, but also data control with HYCU and Dell. My name is Andy Fernandez. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at HYCU, but I'm very excited to be joined here by Aimie on the Dell side. Aimie, for those who maybe don't know you yet, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background? We're all very excited to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Andy. So my name's Aimie Coole, and I work within the EMEA Technology Office at Dell Technologies. I specialise in data protection and cyber resiliency in the industry for 20 plus years. My background is engineering. So I was out on the field installing data domain and all different types of backup software with data domain, our cyber recovery vault. So I've got a very technical background.
I think Amy's an engineer at heart still, I would assume.
Yes, absolutely.
Incredible. Perfect. Aimie, thank you so much for being here with us. We're very excited for this discussion. For those who were thinking, what is HYCU? What does that stand for? Is that a Japanese poem? It actually stands for Hybrid Cloud Uptime. And our mission is to build a safer world through universal protection of data. We'll get into that exactly what we mean around universal protection of data. And you also see that in the context of working with Dell to provide that protection as well. We have over 4,600 customers globally and organizations that are protecting the crown jewels of their environment with HYCU in over 78 countries as well, with significant investment and commitment from not only organizations like Bain Capital and Crew, but also Atlassian, Okta Ventures, you name it. Now, let's talk a little bit about something here that's very critical, which is Microsoft 365. Aimie, I think in the past, and you know this from your engineering background and actually being at the customer level as well, we always have a bias when we think about mission critical tier one applications, right? To your virtual machines, right? Tier one VMs, that is production, that's what needs to be protected. But when you think about the criticality of data today, especially within Microsoft 365, it runs your entire business. This entire conversation that you and I are having is using M365, right? We're leveraging Teams to perform this recording. We're having this discussion on Teams. We're going to send you an email. I'm going to store it on SharePoint. This entire thing is made available because of M365. Now, with that, it means that it must be protected. It must be seen as part of the crown jewels of your environment. If something were to happen to Microsoft 365, specifically something within email, organizations can potentially stop doing business. And we also know the impact that it can have on productivity. But I think what we've noticed, and the good news is that most people really understand this already. But Aimie, this is a concept that I think you've been aware of for a very long time. And it's this kind of bias or myth that comes about with SaaS applications where, hey, we've been hosting Exchange server, or we've been hosting Jira server or some form of application in my data center, and I've been backing it up. I have disaster recovery in play. I know exactly what to do. I have full control. I can go to my data center and manage this myself. But now all of a sudden, I'm paying a service. I'm paying a subscription. Somebody else is hosting it for me. And it's super, super, super easy for me to be able to say, well, I think Microsoft's got it taken care of. And that's where the shared responsibility came about. And the best way that I could describe it to the audience, and most people really understand this for 365, but it applies to every SaaS application. What we're discussing here is going to apply to Entra ID, to Hub, to Jira, to Salesforce. And it's the concept of a parking garage. Think of Microsoft as a parking garage, right? So, Aimie, if you ever have to go to London, right? When you go to London and you have to park a car, assuming you drove there, which is probably not very likely, what do we expect from this parking garage? We expect that we can go in, that we can pay, that the lights are on, and that you're able to come back to a car and drive out. But what happens if you leave your window down and somebody steals your laptop or somebody scratches your car? The garage doesn't take any responsibility for the contents. They take no liability. The same thing happens in a SaaS tenancy. If I delete an email, it's impossible for Microsoft to understand, did I want to delete that email or was it a mistake? So I have to take that responsibility myself. So it's really, really important to understand that you have to back up and recover, not just your emails or Teams or OneNote. You have to make sure that anything that you have as a service must be protected as well. But Aimie, I was doing some research and I found something pretty interesting, which was there are over 90 vendors in the ecosystem right now that offer backup and recovery for Microsoft 365. Over 90. Clearly, there's a challenge and a pain here, but I want to talk to you about a couple of the requirements that organizations need to understand today when they're trusting their backups with a vendor. And here's a couple of things that you're going to need and think about, especially if you're considering protecting M365 for the first time or moving on from another vendor. The first thing that you need is coverage. It's not just about OneDrive or SharePoint or email. It's about protecting the entire data estate within Microsoft. But the most important thing that we're going to talk about today, especially with Aimie, is this concept of control. Where are your backups? Are they held by another vendor? What are the consequences behind that? And what does that actually mean? You want to make sure that the solution that you're using is easy to use, that it has immutability. And we're going to talk about immutability and true immutability as well. And what does that actually mean? You have to make sure that your recovery is not a bulk operation, that it's an advanced recovery, whether it's entire instance or specific files. And you want to make sure that you're just not adding another backup vendor to your data protection stack. It's not just about saying, hey, I'm using this vendor for my VMs, this vendor for my cloud instances, this vendor for M365, and all of a sudden you have an entire data protection stack in your company. And of course, you want to make sure that you optimize for costs. This discussion today is how we're able to do this with Dell and how critical it is. But I want to double click on the concept of control. Where are your backups is extremely important. Why? This has an impact on your data sovereignty. Where is the data processed? How much leverage do you have over a vendor that's holding your backups hostage? And what does that mean from a price perspective? Can you control the tiers? Can you control costs? Can you control the performance? It's very, very, very important to understand that. And that's why I wanted to introduce this kind of new phase of what we're doing at HYCU within Microsoft 365. And it's the ability to protect M365 with complete freedom and control of your storage. That means that HYCU does not store your backups. Think of us as an encrypted highway from Microsoft 365 to your storage location. The solution focuses on true immutability. And we're going to talk a little bit about Aimie, what that true immutability actually looks like. And it requires the ability to protect not just M365, but the rest of your data estate using your storage, using backups in your control. And of course, it's not just about Exchange Online. It's about being able to protect everything and being able to restore granularly across all critical applications like OneNote, like OneDrive, Planner, Teams, Exchange, you name it. But the reason that I really want to have this discussion today and why I'm so excited to talk about Aimie is the concept of SaaS with sovereignty. We said it at the beginning. There are over 90 vendors who are protecting or offering protection of M365. There are only maybe a few that are giving customers the ability to store backups in their own storage. And there's only one that's doing that with Dell. But I want to make something very clear here. When another backup vendor owns your backups and has complete control of that because it's running in their AWS or Google or Azure or their data center, they have full control from a pricing perspective. We've seen customers so many times pay massive premiums because storage is included, but you don't have a say into what those storage requirements are. So when we extended our integration for Microsoft 365, we did it with this concept of data control, that you have control over where it is, over how much you're paying for storage, how you're using the storage, and can you even unlock things like deduplication and compression to make those storage costs lower and so that you have complete control. So with that, I want to really spend the rest of this conversation talking to Aimie. Very excited about this, but Aimie, give us a quick little insight into your perspective within the Dell ecosystem of what does this partnership with HYCU look like, and what does that mean for PowerProtect?
We are very excited at Dell about the partnership that we've formed with HYCU. And as you will be familiar with the integration with our data protection portfolio, we have a product that's called PowerProtect Data Domain, and that is the foundation to our cyber resiliency here at Dell. And around Christmas time, we introduced DD Boost integration with HYCU and Data Domain. And we are launching in the next couple of weeks some very, very exciting integration for us, where we will be able to protect SaaS and other cloud workloads being backed up to PowerProtect Data Domain. So it's a real big milestone for us to be able to have this integration for cloud workloads. And we're just going to further integrate the DD Boost protocol into the HYCU software more and more as the roadmap continues.
Thank you so much, Aimie. Now, Aimie, one of the things that we want to talk about too, for folks who maybe are already using data domain or are thinking about leveraging data domain as well, even outside of HYCU, when you think about all these offerings that organizations have, right? There are so many storage offerings today, especially in the public cloud, where organizations simply use them and they kind of forget and they just assume that those are the offerings out there. When you're talking to somebody who's potentially using a public cloud, can you talk through a little bit about the capabilities and what data domain has to offer, and what is the value to me as a customer to be able to leverage that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about data domain, we have different models available. So we have our physical appliances, which you would have on premise. We have integrated appliances, and we have virtual appliances as well. The virtual appliance is available across all of your public cloud providers, direct from the marketplace. And you could deploy that using committed spend in Azure. The licensing is very flexible with Data Domain Virtual Edition. It's licensed per terabyte. And it could be either perpetual, subscription, or TLA based. So we like to give our customers options. One of the key benefits of Data Domain between either the cloud, on-prem, it could be a hybrid setup, is data mobility. We have complete control over our data when it's stored in PowerProtect Data Domain, and also we are able to replicate. So we use a replication mechanism built into the data domain, and that gives us the option to be able to replicate. It could be from one cloud provider to another cloud provider, so you have full control over that data path. It is the industry-leading deduplication backup events, and we have just upped our guarantee to 65 to 1. And what that's going to give you as an end user is great data reduction on your backup data. So it's going to reduce your storage footprint, therefore reducing your cost, and it is super easy to deploy. Like I said, you can go straight into the marketplace and you can deploy PowerProtect Data Domain.
Aimie, that's very interesting when you talk about how you're able to leverage data domain within the cloud ecosystem. And your mention on costs is very important. And the reason that's so important to me is what most people don't realize is that 60% of their corporate data already lives in the cloud, and that will only continue to grow. It means that the storage costs will also continue to grow, even independent of Microsoft 365. So leveraging PowerProtect in this ecosystem makes a ton of sense. But let's now walk into this context of Microsoft 365. Most organizations we've found are paying a premium for storage when they're leveraging a backup vendor that has managed storage. Leveraging data domain obviously gives you full control of that, but it also helps from a cost perspective. Aimie, we spoke a little bit about already being able to leverage data domain, especially in the cloud environment, the portability, the cost benefits, the performance that you get from that. But let's talk now about the guarantee of backups and the guarantee that I have availability to those backups. Most folks, when they're leveraging a backup vendor from 365, that data is sitting elsewhere. There's third-party risk in that because somebody else could access backups if that vendor is compromised and they can access. Let's talk through the difference between leveraging HYCU and data domain for M365 or any other SaaS and cloud backups. And what is the durability, the confidence that customers can have? Can you walk us through the value add there of data domain?
Yeah, sure. So PowerProtect Data Domain's architecture is designed for backup data. It is not your standard storage array. The DIA, which we call it in-house, is the data invulnerability architecture on the data domain. And that guarantees 100% data validation end-to-end for your data that's stored on the data domain. So it's ensuring that we retain the integrity of your data, and also that you're going to be able to successfully restore your data every time with inline data verification, continuous fault detection, and self-healing and recovery verification on the system. And this is all built into data domain. These are features and functionality that's in the data domain. It's no additional cost. You don't have to turn it on. It does all of this by default. And I'll give you an example of how powerful this architecture is. So we get, on average, around about one cyber attack, which will get raised a week with our incident response team. And I've worked on some of these cases when I worked in support years ago. And even if you have no immutability turned on, which protects your data from being deleted, and you have no snapshots turned on, so we would always recommend layering up protection on the data domain as well. We're not just looking at backup data, we can add additional layers of security. And somebody managed to get into that repository and delete your backups because there was no immutability, there was no snapshots, and they got access into the system, deleted your backups. We are still able to recover that data from the volumes on the data domain. So it's not a standard storage array, it's a file system. So you can't execute on a file system either. And we'll go into the security side in a little bit more detail on some of the other slides. But I've heard from customers refer to data domain as bulletproof, and I'm a big believer in that.
Aimie, there's no better validation than the volume of cyber attacks that are leveraged, and clearly successful cyber attacks in the context of actually penetrating an organization. But the fact that organizations are able to recover anyways is outstanding. We always, it's a little cliche to say, Aimie, but recovery is the last line of defense. And, sometimes I cringe saying that, but it is true. And when folks are evaluating this and they're thinking about, well, my backup vendor that's managing my storage just told me that it's immutable. And maybe that's immutability to object lock in some public cloud. But it's very, very different from immutability that you have full control of, with, I want to say, the pedigree of data domain in this context too. But let's double click a little bit more on the cyber resilience front, Aimie. When you think about Microsoft 365 and any other SaaS service, ransomware itself is something that always goes after VMs in a very standard form of the cyber attack. But when you're using a SaaS service, you have to think about it from so many angles. You have to think about insider threat. You have to think about, is there a mistake that happens at the vendor level? If Microsoft makes a mistake, whether somebody misconfigures something within your instance, or there's a supply chain breach within Microsoft as well. Aimie, there was an incident within one of the public cloud providers in Australia, and it was a pension fund. And what we found was that the entire project of that pension fund was accidentally deleted. Imagine that. Imagine the vendor accidentally misconfiguring and deleting your projects. And imagine not having a backup of that data to come back to when things are set back to normal. So it's really critical to not just think about, hey, what if I accidentally delete something and I need to get my email back, or my CEO deleted an email and I need to get it back. But what happens if there's an insider threat, and what happens if there's a supply chain incident? Let's talk through, Aimie, from your perspective, the value added and the differentiation, specifically in cyber resilience for data domain.
Yeah, sure. So at Dell, immutability is not enough for us when we talk about cyber resiliency. And we have over 2,600 cyber recovery vaults out there in the field today. And every single cyber recovery vault is different, because we go in and we sit with the customer and we scope exactly what they need to protect within that cyber recovery vault. And the foundation of that vault is PowerProtect data domain. So that is where your data will be stored. And we would integrate HYCU. HYCU will be the backup application. And we can have that inside cyber recovery vault as well. So we support the vault with HYCU and data domain. And we start to layer on security within the appliance itself. So we follow a zero trust architecture, hardware root of trust, secure boot, role-based access, secure period. We have two types of immutability with data domain, two flavors. So one is retention lock governance and the other is retention lock compliance mode. And again, these are all features that are built into the data domain. It's no additional cost. A lot of it is switched on by default, or you can go in and switch some of these features on. Now, when it comes to immutability, if you look out on the market today, the majority of backup vendors, they use retention lock governance mode, which is basically trust your admin. With retention lock compliance mode, it's a more stringent level of security. we would always recommend within the cyber recovery vault that you implement compliance mode. So once that's enabled, if you wanted to delete that data that's been locked on the data domain, you would have to physically go to the data center and wipe the data domain with a fresh install of the operating system. It's that secure. End-to-end encryption. So with our DD Boost protocol, we encrypt at every point in time. Multi-factor authentication across all of the data protection portfolio. Secure system clock. So this prevents anybody getting into the system, and if they try and tamper with the NTP service on the data domain, it stops any drifting within that NTP service, because if a threat actor did gain access, then what they're going to try and do is remove the immutability, reverse your retention period, and try and delete your data. So we need to make sure that we have a secure clock in order to be able to protect the timestamp on the files. And like I said previously, data domain is a file system, hashed containers. It cannot be recognized by malware. And I always say, if you look at it like a secure tunnel, that is where your data is going to be transferred from the client to the storage across DD Boost.
No, that makes sense. I'm very interested in what you said, Aimie, too, because a lot of folks, they just, they read immutability and they assume they're good to go and they're covered. And they say, well, my vendor is leveraging immutable storage in the cloud. I should be fine, right? And you have to really double think, really double click on what that means for your organization and if that's a risk that you're willing to live, or would you rather take matters into your own hand and really extend the effort in order to delete and tamper with a backup as well. So this is incredibly impressive, and it makes me very proud to be able to integrate with data domain, especially because, as you know, Aimie, SaaS and cloud backups are so underserved, such a limited environment, and folks really don't have the same capabilities that they're used to when it comes to prem and traditional infrastructure backup. But Aimie, you're an engineer at heart. Every time I talk to Dell engineers, what they love and they get excited about too is obviously cyber resilience. It's the cost benefits as well, but also the performance. At the end of the day, the performance is incredibly exciting. It's the pedigree of data domain. Can you talk through the power of DD Boost in this context?
Yeah, sure. So DD Boost, as we've already mentioned, is a protocol on the data domain, and we work with yourselves to integrate the DD Boost library into your software so it can connect to PowerProtect data domain. So we will give your engineering teams the SDK, so the software development kit, and they then embed that into HYCU, and then that opens up to be able to integrate with PowerProtect data domain. And then we bring lots of other integration as well. We benefit with DD Boost because it brings source side deduplication. So we are deduping at source before the data is sent across the network. So that means that we're only sending new data across the network, which minimizes bandwidth consumption and makes it very, very efficient when you are transferring data across the WAN. Lower utilization because we are minimizing the bandwidth, and of course less infrastructure because the global deduplication that we gain with PowerProtect data domain means that we are reducing that storage footprint, which means less capacity, less power, less cooling, and that applies in the cloud as well. And we have to think about costs because they can creep up very, very quickly in the cloud, and we have to maintain control over our data to ensure that we have a point in time backup to be able to recover to. And I think that's key, is sometimes that's forgotten about when a lot of customers start to move data into the cloud, workloads, they adopt services, is can you ensure that you can restore from a point in time backup? You need to ensure that it's healthy, it's time stamped, and you know when that data is being restored from. And like I said, seamless integration with software is really, really easy to set up. It's literally wizard driven in HYCU. You integrate your data domain, next, next. And there's lots of other features in PowerProtect data domain as well, like we use multi-streaming, so we're able to back up workloads in parallel, and we do that for restores as well.
Aimie, that's just very interesting. I think people sometimes simply assume that they're solving the backup problem, and then they realize over years that they've given up complete leverage and control of their backups. That makes it easy, or that makes it very difficult for them to walk away from a vendor, but it also makes it difficult for them to have a decision point or any power over how much am I paying for these backups? What is the backup frequency that I can actually deliver on this? How quickly can I restore? And of course, how much of this subscription cost is based on the storage premiums that I can't see myself. And that's a very, very important concept here, where when you look at something like data domain, the reason we see this as such a valuable storage target is not just the performance, it's not just the cost benefits, it's not just the security, but it's the ability to have full control with something that is what I would call, you call bulletproof, I call battle tested, and it is something that organizations can trust across the board. And Aimie, the reason we're so excited as well is, as a customer, Microsoft 365, especially if you're a Microsoft shop, is part of your footprint. It's a massive part of that, but it's just one of the set of critical applications that you have to protect. People often forget, Aimie, even things like Entra ID. What happens if you assign the intern to clean up a couple of policies and they make a mistake and you have to recreate everything? Or what if there's a misconfiguration that changes your group settings? People have to think about this very critically. And of course, there's the infrastructure side of the world. With what's happening with VMware and organizations really now thinking, what does my infrastructure look like? Where am I running my workloads? A lot of folks are looking at things like Azure Local, or they're looking at Hyper-V, or they're looking at Nutanix, or they're even trying to modernize the public cloud. All of that still requires a standard of protection. And it all requires that you have full control of your backups. And with HYCU, with Dell, we're able to protect that entire Microsoft ecosystem, but also the rest of your organization. One of the most fascinating things that we found over the last 2 years is that the average organization, Aimie, has over 200 SaaS apps. And when I say average organization, I'm talking about a mid-sized company. I'm talking a couple thousand employees. When you look at the enterprise level, that number is much higher. They used to be controlled by IT, but now if I'm an application owner in sales and marketing, I can spin up my own instance with a credit card of a new application, with customer information, with employee information, and that we can consider as critical. All of these applications, just like 365, must be protected alongside cloud and alongside your infrastructure as well. And that's what we're very, very excited about. It's HYCU's, let's call it universal reach, and being able to protect your entire tech stack or your data estate and power of the data domain ecosystem as well. One of the things that we're going to continue talking about this in future sessions, though, is really understand the cost element. What is the total cost of ownership? What are the benefits that you can unlock with HYCU and Dell? And Aimie and I are going to have an entire session focused on that up next as well. But for those who want more information now, you can scan this QR code and you can have access to a data sheet, or you can take a product tour yourself and actually click through just how Aimie mentioned, how easy it is to designate data domain as a storage target, connect, and start protecting Microsoft 365 and the rest of your environment immediately. So I'm going to give a couple seconds for folks to be able to scan the QR code. You'll have access to the links as well. But Aimie, it's been a pleasure. I want to thank you so much for your time, for the attention. I personally learned a lot about data domain, and I'm sure we can spend hours talking about the virtues of data domain because it's something that is incredibly profound.
Thank you, Andy.
No, thank you so much, and everyone have a great day.